Welcome to the Rebranding Christianity podcast, a place where we talk about and explore more authentic and loving expressions of the Christian faith. For the past 2 episodes, we've looked at 3 things that probably need to be present if churches or communities of faith are going to change the negative narrative about Christianity. 1, working to tear down the barriers that divide us, race, ethnicities, socioeconomic factors, and pursuing both unity and diversity. 2, becoming a people that are known for doing good, caring for those in need, making their communities better. And 3, being known as a people with the widest welcome. Is it sometimes tricky to know how to pursue these goals while also staying true to what the Bible teaches? Sometimes, maybe, but not impossible. Jesus did it, and he told us how to follow his example. In today's episode, we're going to get a bit more personal. If the last 2 episodes focus on a few examples that we could pursue together in community, this episode focuses on what does it mean for me as an individual? What are some things that I could focus on regardless of what my church does? We're going to talk about that in today's episode. I'm Cindy Park. Stick with us.
I'm Greg Holmes. I think all of the episodes that we've had so far, as we've discussed the book Rebranding Christianity with authors Jeff Jones and Mike Hogan, have been interesting and helpful, but they've all led to these conversations, this episode and the next episode. What are some positive things we can do so that a watching world sees what Jesus wants a watching world to see in his community? Mike, I'd love to start with you. In the book, you and Jeff use the term brand ambassador, which sounds like a self-explanatory term, people who represent a brand. But what is the importance of a brand ambassador in business?
Mike, I want to piggyback off of that question too. And is a brand ambassador the same thing as an influencer who has an affiliate code that's posting on social media and hawking a product? Because that's what I think of now when I think of brand ambassador.
Sure. So, well, first of all, I'll say a lot of people do use those terms interchangeably. I think I would probably draw a distinction and say, generally speaking, an influencer is somebody who's sort of known for something else. Right? They're famous for another reason. They're an artist or a politician or whatever, and they're lending some of their persona or some of their fame to your brand to sell product. And at least in my experience, there are certainly influencers who do their homework and want to know a lot about the brand before they'll lend their name to it. But there's a lot who really don't, particularly this one. They just, give me the code or pay me this and you're on the thing. I think ambassador to me is more someone who really begins with the brand. If you're the if you're thinking about you're the ambassador of the United States to England, which is probably a pretty good job. If you're there, you're not somebody who's famous for another reason. You're there representing this country. And I think, as we think about what our citizenship is, of course, it means all Christians are ambassadors, right, for Jesus or for our brand. So first, I would say I do actually like your definition of it's somebody who represents a brand, And I think what I would say is this happens across kind of a broad spectrum, right? And think of a spectrum from sort of very intentionally to very unintentionally. So we talk about like a celebrity, somebody gets paid for it. That's intentionally being the ambassador. Please do this and so on. And we're all familiar with examples of that, of products that we buy. I think, in the best examples, this is somebody who isn't just like a product spokesperson, but somebody that you look and you say, I bet they really use that product. You see somebody who's a multi-millionaire and they're driving a small VW on the, you think, okay, they gave you one of those to do the commercial, but that's not really what you drive to work. And so actually, I think a really good example of this one, just to be controversial for a minute, is Jared and Subway. Right, because if you remember the first part of the story, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it was such a good example because here's this guy Jared who he actually used Subway. I don't think the doctors approved of this, okay, but he actually used Subway as the diet that helped him to lose all the weight. Right? Like, okay, I totally get what the connection is. I picked that example because it also highlights the negative side of it, right? Because you're now tied to this person, and anything negative that happens also reflects negatively on the brand. So there's, I think, a lesson for the church there too about, be careful of the company that you keep. We could certainly spend a lot of time talking about the church and politicians, but I'm not going to go there for now.
Yeah.
Jeff will probably want to go there later. But the second point I would make, though, is really in the context of the book, we're not really talking about celebrity endorsers here.
Yeah.
We're talking about that other end of the spectrum, which I'm just going to use the word unintentionally, that may be a good use or not. But it's not like we're sort of paid to be spokespeople for the church or for Christianity. But I think as Christians, right, like it or not, everything that we do reflects on the brand. And I think that's sort of the main point of the story. So, and what I find interesting is like, okay, like let's say you go and you fly on Delta Airlines and one flight attendant is rude to you. People don't come back and they call up their friends and they go, hey, did you know that one of Delta's 15,000 flight attendants happened to be rude to me on this particular day? Nobody says that, right? They say, wow, they don't care about me. Delta sucks and doesn't care about people.
Right.
So one action, one people. Same for hotels, restaurants, and frankly, churches. You know, way back in my PepsiCo days, we did this meeting once down in Florida at Disney, and the Disney people came to us and they were talking about this concept of customer experience, right? And so one of the things they always try to teach their employees is that every day that you're at work, right, which is just another day for you at work, is actually the most important day of someone's vacation. And you can make it or break it for them. And so when you think about it, on the one hand, it's actually pretty empowering, right? Yeah. But it's also a little bit scary to think that each one of us has that much influence. And I think in the church context, there's this old saying, something like, you may be the only Jesus that some people ever see. Mm-hmm. And so anyone who identifies as a Christian is an ambassador for the brand and for Jesus. And like it or not, people will make decisions about the brand and about Jesus based upon what they see in us. So it really is kind of an awesome responsibility that we have.
Yeah. So Jeff, let's talk about what the New Testament says about being brand ambassador and talk about being a brand ambassador in a church context. Does it matter to the New Testament writers how we're perceived by others?
Yeah, it's pretty overwhelming, really, you know, when you look. And I'm just going to read some of those passages where the apostles were making it really clear that our job as Christians, wherever God has placed us, and 1 Corinthians 7 uses the word placed and assigned. So everywhere we are is not random. We're placed there. We have an assignment there, and the assignment is really to represent Jesus in a compelling way. And for example, Paul, writing to the Thessalonians, tells them to relate in such a way so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders. So they were there at the workplace in that context to win the respect of outsiders. Peter, talking to the Christians in Rome, said, be careful to live properly among your non-believing friends. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior and they will give honor to God when he judges the world. So to be careful about it. Elsewhere in 1 Peter, he tells the Christians in Rome, it is God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. Elsewhere in 1 Peter, you can tell it's a theme for these Christians in Rome, a very pagan environment. He said to keep your conscience clear, relate in a gentle and respectful way. Then if people speak against you, they'll be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. Paul told the Colossians, live wisely among those who are not believers. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your engagement be gracious and attractive in the way that we engage. I mean, I know that I could keep going, right? But Paul tells, in Titus to relate very similarly in a way that those who oppose us will be ashamed and have nothing more bad to say about us. Or he tells certain people in Titus to relate in such a way that makes the gospel, the teaching about God, attractive. And the reason I listed, I mean, there's more passages than that, but the reason I listed those out in the book is that you get to the end of that and you think, wow, this is a big deal to God. Like, this is not something small, because the way people will know that Christianity is legitimate in part is the experience, just like Mike was talking about, the experience they have. And I bet for most of us in our own journey, we can boil it down to one or two people that we respected who embodied something that in their Christianity that was attractive to us. And they invited us, or it sparked a conversation. And that's why if you are a Christian, you probably have one or two of those people you could name. And that's what we're called to be. And it's a huge responsibility. That's why we're told to be very careful how we relate, be very careful how we live, to be intentional, because we're hired. We have a job. That's what we're there to do.
Yeah. There is a strain of Christianity in America, or a type of brand of Christianity in America that actually says faithfulness is speak the truth, do what you feel like God's called you to do, and if people don't like it, then that's on them. Like, who cares what the world thinks or whatever? I'm going to speak the truth. That we can actually sort of be proud of that, and that's what faithfulness looks like, and that seems to be in direct opposition to those passages.
It is. I mean, that's why we're told to be gracious and attractive. We're told to be gentle and respectful and humble always, to be very careful how we engage culture, how we engage people with truth. I mean, it's because it's not because we don't care about truth. It's because we do.
Right.
We care so much about truth. We want to represent the truth of Jesus in a way that makes it appealing, that makes people actually want to hear what we have to say. Like Peter also told the Roman Christians, right, to relate to people in such a way that people ask you for the reason, the hope that you have. Like they're curious about you. They want to know what makes you tick. And when you do the other, all you do is just, you come across as arrogant and rude and mean. And we're told not to do that, because all we do is shove people away from God that he's pulling toward himself.
Yeah. And sometimes I think even when we're speaking the truth, it's not so much what we say, it's how we say it.
Yeah.
Like tone kind of matters. Talk to us a little bit about kind of what you've learned about tone. Yeah.
Well, I speak for a living. I mean, I do. I also lead and do other things too, right? But tone, and like a communicator, I care just as much about tone of anybody that goes on the Chase Oaks platform as I do about their content. I mean, I think both are equally important because both communicate so much. And I've had occasional times where I've removed people from the platform because they didn't have the right tone, because it's that important, because it shapes the communication. Like I use the illustration of the book of my dog, Chewy, who's a cute little guy. And if I come, if I say Chewy, I could say blandly, Chewy, come here. That doesn't mean a whole lot. But if I say, Chewy, come here, right? His tail's going to be wagging. He's going to be all happy. He's like, ooh, this is going to be a treat or something good, right? He's so awesome. I can't wait, right? And his tail's wagging. His whole body wags. But if I say, Chewy, come here.
Right.
Right. And he knows he's done something bad.
Right.
He's getting in trouble. He's going to go run under the bed. And I'm going to have to drag him out or whatever, right? Same exact words, just different tone. And that's the power of tone. And the New Testament talks a whole lot about tone and how we engage. And you look at the tone of Jesus, and he was very intentional with his tone. The only people he had a sort of a edgy tone with, a harsh tone with, were religious people who should have known better. Everybody else, he didn't. And we're told how to engage those outside the faith, to be really careful, not just with our content, but to be really careful with our tone, because that actually communicates more than even our words do.
You as you talk about tone, you specifically call out three things. You talk about humility and graciousness and a refusal to slander. I feel like you could talk about a lot of things when you talk about tone, but you talk about those three.
Right.
And could you maybe, you can either talk about all of them or just like, why those three?
Well, it's not that profound what I'm about to answer.
Okay.
When I listed all the things that we're told to do, I mean, the words the Bible uses, these are just Bible words to guide our interaction with our culture, with people outside the faith, are kind, respectful, gentle, patient, humble, forgiving, compassionate, so on. Okay, so it just keeps going. There's so many that I had to summarize it somehow. I had to come up with some buckets. Okay. And so I came up with those three buckets to bucket just this plethora of instructions of how to engage our culture, which shows how important it is to God that we really pay attention to that and take it seriously, that how we engage is even more important, I think, than what we say.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips then specifically on how we engage? You give an example in the book actually about your own struggle with humility and how you were like called out. So even though you're a pastor, it's not like you have this supernatural gift of humility. You've had to learn that for yourself. And so what does that look like to exercise humility now?
Well, yeah, we're told to be humble to everyone and gentle always. And the everyone and always gets me, right? Because it's easy for me to be humble toward, good people or people I agree with or people I respect.
Or humble towards humble people.
Or yeah,
That's right.
That's right. And gentle and respectful toward good people or people that but it's everybody always. And that's where the challenge comes in for me. I had it this week where I was listening to a podcast, and it's a podcast I enjoy, the host, and the guest on the podcast when I saw was coming up was like, oh no, I don't like that guy. He's a pastor in another area. He's written a lot of books, but he just rubs me the wrong way. I don't like his views of church and culture. He's just, I'm not going to get anything out of this. But just out of laziness, I didn't change it. I kept it on because I was driving down the road doing, and so he started talking. And it was, hate to say it, brilliant and really impactful. In fact, he said a comment. He was talking about politics in church, and he's actually serves in Washington, D.C. Now you're guessing who he is. And he said what he kept talking about with his church is what does not unite the church should never be allowed to divide the church. So political thing, that's not even what unites us. So it shouldn't be allowed to divide us. It was incredible. It was, and the whole, I was thinking, and it was so humbling to me to realize, man, here I wrote the guy off before I listened. And thank God I was too lazy to shift it because I really needed to hear it. It was hugely helpful for me. And I think in the world and in the body of Christ, James says that we should be the quickest to listen, the slowest to speak, and the slowest to respond in anger. Now, the respond in anger, right? We get that instant response. We should be the slowest to do that in a polarized culture, not the quickest. We should be the slowest to speak, to be heard, and the quickest to listen. And he wasn't just talking about a few people. He's saying in general, that's the way we should be. And we should be the most humble, the most gentle, the most respectful, all that, which not only represents Jesus well, but also is what makes us the kind of people that Jesus wants us to become, because we need people who disagree with us. We need people who are different from us. If we just...
Do we? Because what's the end goal then of being humble or gracious? Is that just to win you over to my side so I can convince you that I'm right? Like, why is it important that we treat people that way?
Yeah, so if we have good theology, we know that we're fallible. God is omniscient. He knows everything. God is, he's the one that doesn't make mistakes. I, however, am not omniscient. I don't know everything, and I do make mistakes. And therefore, if I know and not only that, I'm sinful. So that means I need other people to round me out. And therefore, when I pursue somebody who's different, doesn't mean I always agree with them, right? But I listen to them, move beyond stereotype, listen to them, and engage them. Then something happens in me. It knocks off my edges. It keeps me from doing what Jesus never did to people, and that is stereotype them. For to love like Jesus did, then okay, we can't ever do that. And it rounds out my perspective. Dwight, who helped write the book, is an example of that. So I don't talk about this much, but because I don't like the church divided politically, but I'm a political conservative by and large. Now I guess I'd be called a moderate, but how things go. But Dwight is very progressive in his political views. And I remember 21, 22 years ago when I first met him and realized that he was that progressive, my first thought was, wow, I thought this guy was smart.
Wow.
I guess I was wrong. I mean, in my mind, I'm like, he can't be that smart, Wow. And then when you talk to him, you realize, oh my goodness, this guy's crazy smart. I'm pretty stupid. Then it went to, he's just not biblically that astute. And then you talk to him, and Dwight is very biblically astute. He has a theology degree, and he's thought through things quite well, even though he disagrees with me. And it was really humbling for me to realize, wait a minute, I'm the one that's feeling naked here. I'm the one, I need Dwight in my life. Not that I'm going to become necessarily progressive or whatever, but it helped me see that there's actually reasoning behind what he thinks that informs my point of view in a way that really enriches my life and my point of view. And that's why we need diversity in our life, and God calls the church to be a diverse place, is not just the optics of it, to a world that, oh, look at those people, they're nice to everybody. It's because it's not just optics, it's the way transformation happens. I'm transformed in the context of other people's disagreements and differences. It's uncomfortable, but it's that discomfort that actually helps change my life and round out my point of view.
I think it's also interesting with Dwight. I don't know Dwight well. I've had a couple conversations with him, but he also is quite humble.
Yeah.
And he is the smartest guy in just about any room. But I think it's that humility that lets you guys continue to talk. And I feel like that's one thing I think sometimes when we hear that we need to pursue humility, it feels like a giving up, that we just, until you actually encounter someone who's truly humble and you experience how disorienting that is. And you can come in with your arguments and all this kind of stuff, and you encounter someone who's humble, and it's like it knocks you off balance. And it's a pretty powerful thing. And Jesus certainly demonstrated that. The humility is a powerful thing.
Well, we need to wrap this up for the sake of time, but we still have one more conversation that we need to have about the book, Rebranding Christianity. As you listen to what it means to be a brand ambassador, you might be wondering, how important is it really how we're perceived by a world that rejects Jesus? Didn't Jesus himself say we would be hated? That's a great question. We're going to talk about that next time on the next episode of Rebranding Christianity.